The story you're about to hear is as difficult as it gets. It is a tragedy that one can hardly even conceive that happened on a Saturday night a little over 43 years ago in Columbus, Georgia. For you to understand the entire story, my guest will share the horrific details of what he witnessed as a young boy, as he suddenly lost both of his parents. Listener discretion is advised. You're about to be reminded that good people under the influence have the capacity to do bad things, and giving up on life is always a permanent solution to a temporary problem. But this story is not just a story of tragedy, but rather a story of triumph. It is a reminder that no matter what adversity one faces in life, victory may be just around the next corner. I first met Mark Mullins at my funeral home in 1981. He was 14 years of age, and he was a frantic kid in what seemed to be an impossible situation. I wondered how in the world he would ever navigate life after what he experienced. 43 years later, you will hear the answer to what I was wondering. Mark Mullins is a living miracle, and he has the receipts to go with it. If you're in need of a miracle or know someone who is, this story might just be for you.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast. I've got an old friend with me today. His name is Mark Mullins, and Mark is going to tell you a story that will make the hair stand on your neck. I kind of lived it when it happened, when he lost both of his parents on a tragic, tragic day. The reason I've got Mark on is he had a Facebook post the other day with his beautiful mother, and it was the anniversary of her death, and I immediately knew this was a wonderful story about how somebody can overcome the most difficult situations in life and make a wonderful life. So this is going to be an inspiring story. But I reached out to Mark, and he immediately said, if you want me to be on, I'll be on. But I think he's a little nervous about it. It's not something he talks about, but he's willing to talk about it. So, Mark, thank you for being on here with me.
You're very welcome, Bruce.
I'm just glad that you're able to do this. Let's just start and get right into this, and then we'll go back and talk about the journey that you've been on. But it was on February the 21st, 1981. That is 43 years ago, a little over now. You experienced a day like no other. So why don't you just talk a little bit about that Saturday and a little bit about what happened, Mark?
I was 14. My mom and dad, they were going through a divorce. My dad had moved out. He was living in a trailer on Victory Drive somewhere off North Lumpkin Road, and we was living in Oakland Park.
This is in Columbus, right?
This is in Columbus, Georgia, yeah.
And your daddy was in the service?
He was in there almost 20 years at that time. Daddy was a bad alcoholic, and I didn't start seeing it until probably 13. I started seeing how it was affecting the relationship between him and my mom. And, but anyway, she just got to the point, she just couldn't take it anymore. And so after trying to talk to him and nothing would change, she come to me and we talked, and she told me she was going to file for divorce, and she did. And and she was scared to death. But anyway, the night and it was probably about maybe 2 or 3 weeks before everything happened, she asked me to stay home because he hadn't got home yet. And she told me she was going to tell him that she filed. Right. And so anyway, I seen his headlights pull up, and so I just went to my bedroom, and I remember I was scared to death because I knew that he would be drinking. But anyway, he come in, and then they was in the den, and I was back there in that bedroom, and I had it was a cedar stick, and I just had it in case something happened, and I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know what he's going to do. So I heard her scream my name, and so I run in there. And I guess she had told him, but he was standing there with a Coleman. I don't know if you remember, Bruce, the metal Coleman lantern
Oh
fuel
yeah.
can.
Oh yeah. Camping things.
He,
Yeah.
yeah, he had one of them. I guess after she told him, he went out to his shop and got it. And he was standing there like he was fixing to pour it on. And I come in there and I told him to leave her alone. And I'll never forget that look. He just stared at me, and it was the most far away look. And I just stood there, and I had that stick in my hand. And I was scared to death.
You were 14, so you were a pretty big old boy, right?
Well, I was skinny.
Right.
I was skinny, but I was getting some height on me,
Right.
But I was still scared of him. He was 5'7",
Right.
but I was scared of his his
Well, who
demeanor
wouldn't
when
be? Yeah, who wouldn't
yeah,
be? Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, he just stared at me, and then he left out of the sliding glass door, and me and her stayed there that night. He didn't come home that night, and I slept in the bed with her. And I won't never forget, she was crying. We were scared. I was scared. And then things after that, eventually he moved out. So anyway, it was me and her living there. And I remember, I had a good friend. Me and him were best friends. He lived down the road from me. And on that Saturday, 21st, he was already moved out. And so me and Roy, there was a girl that I went to school with. She wanted to know, did I want her hamster? And I said, yeah, I'll take it. So me and him went that day, probably in the afternoon, to her house, and I got the hamster. And we walked. It was in the same neighborhood.
Right.
So when we walked back, I had the hamster cage and the hamster. Well, Mama was down at Uda and George's house, which were, friends of ours. They were stationed in Collinsville at the same time we was, but they moved to Columbus. She had called the house phone and told me that she was down there for, when I get back, to come and eat that. Right. George was grilling hamburgers. So anyway, so me and Roy got back with the hamster. I stopped by the house. She wasn't home, and I put the hamster cage. So then I was going to go to Roy's house, which he lived further down the road from where Uda and George lived. And we walked past Uda and George's house. And I told him, I said, nah, I better go eat.
Right.
So I don't know. It was just weird. And so I turned around and went back. Went in the front door, and they was in there, and I remember, my mother didn't drink a lot, but I remember she had a Miller Lite she was drinking,
Right.
Probably just sipping on it. And George and Uda, they drank beer, but anyway, so we went in, and they was fixing me a plate, and the door knocked, the front door. Somebody knocked on the front door, and I went and looked, and it was Daddy. And anyway, I went back, and I remember Mama. I guess she was scared that he would say something to her for drinking a beer. I remember she hid her beer behind an appliance on the kitchen counter. And then she went to the door, and, I was in the kitchen. George was in the den watching TV, and Uda was in the kitchen, and they was fixing my plate. But Mama went to the door, and he come in, and he stood there, and, and he said, he just looked at me, and he said, Mark, go home. And I just stood there, and I didn't really know what to do. And then Uda and Mama said, he's fixing to eat. He's not going home. And then he looked at me again and said, go home. So I just stood there, and I didn't know what to do. So then he just stopped, and he went in the den, and he was talking to George for a few minutes. And I don't know, but he was drinking heavily.
Right.
Daddy was. And George said something to him. I think he said something to George like, you want to drink a beer or something? And George said, I think you've had enough. So he come back out of the den and was standing there. And he said, well, Kay, my mama, they called her Kay, but her name's Karen.
Right.
He said, can I speak to you outside? And she said, yeah. And he headed toward the front door, and he walked, opened the door. The door was open. He walked out the storm door. And I looked at her, and I said, don't go out there. And I remember it, and she looked at me and said, don't worry, and so she walked out the front door, and I went to the window that was next to the front door, and I was looking, and I just seen him grab her, and seen hand go to his back pocket. He wore nylon pants all the time with cowboy boots, but he pulled a pistol out, and I started hollering and screaming, he's got a gun. And by then I heard like 2 shots. And so they come running. George come out of the den, and Uda, they come running over there and tried to pull me back. And I wanted to go out there, to get Mama.
Sure.
And anyway, through the commotion out the storm door, I seen Daddy walk across the yard. And then finally I looked, and I seen his cowboy boots sticking up in the air. He had shot himself. And and then I looked.
You watched all of it, right?
I did.
Yeah.
And I won't ever forget, George come out there, and things started, I remember everything, but it's kind of scattered.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying?
I can imagine.
But I remember seeing her laying there. She was kind of like with her knees drawn up.
Right.
And there was, just like a lot of blood all around her head. And and so George come out there, and he had a towel. And so he, I'm sorry.
No, listen, I don't know how you even, 40-something years later, I don't even know how you still talk about it, but it's incredible.
George come out with a towel. I remember the towel was white. He was trying to, put it around her head, and the glass on the storm door was shattered, and there was a bullet in the door. I didn't see it till later, but one of the bullets went in the door, and but I don't know if when he walked out of the yard, I don't know how many shots he fired. He shot her twice, and then I don't know if he shot at the door. I don't know, but I remember then time kind of went by quick. And I remember cutting my fingers on the shattered door and they wouldn't let me go out. They kept trying to hold me back in there, and then I remember it was getting dark, and it was just, I remember seeing blue lights everywhere, and I remember seeing neighborhood kids standing in the street looking. I don't know, my whole life just changed,
In an instant.
Yeah. And then gradually they kept me in the house, and so and eventually I had to ride, and I believe it was my mama's lawyer. And Uda and me rode to the police department. And when we got there, I don't know what the reason was for going there. I remember telling one of the police officers I want to go see my mama, and I thought maybe she was in the hospital, but and he come out and told me that she didn't make it. And
Right.
eventually, I guess we went back, and from there, then my aunt and my grandmother, and I don't know who all come, but they come. They was down for a while, and I think we had to go by Daddy's and get stuff, but I had to ride, and that was a long ride back to Taylor County, and
Yeah.
and so we got to Taylor County, and my brother Ronnie, he's 5 years older than me. He was living in Taylor County with my grandmother at the time, because when we were stationed in Germany, he graduated, and he took a flight and went back to Georgia early to live with her, help her out, supposedly. When we got to Taylor County to my grandmother's, he hadn't got home yet. He was out with his friends, on a Saturday night doing their thing. And I remember, I guess he pulled up, and there were so many cars there, but he come and found me. And anyway, I think that night they give me some nerve pill. I think it was Ativan or something. And I remember I finally went to sleep, and then when I woke up, it's like everybody says, I was hoping it was a dream,
Right.
But it wasn't.
Folks, you're listening to Mark Mullins telling one of the most harrowing stories that you can even imagine. We're going to be right back. Mark, just out of curiosity, George and Uda, are they still alive? Do you see them at all now? What's their situation?
Well, George, he died from, I think, complications of diabetes. See, and then Uda, she's still alive, and I see her on Facebook. But see, I went back and lived with them after I lived with Nanny, my grandmother, for about it, a little while. I didn't want to live in Taylor County. I wanted to go back to where my friends were.
Right. You were in high school in Columbus, yeah.
I did. I went to high school in Columbus, but then I ended up leaving there because they started going through a divorce. And I worked at Piggly Wiggly after school and stuff. But one day, it was on a Saturday, I just decided, I said, I can't take this. I'm not going to go through this again. And I just got what clothes I could get, and I just went back to Nanny's.
So going back to that day, I was listening or watching the 11 o'clock news. Kathy and I had been married 4 years in that neighborhood, and she had gone to bed. I was watching 11 o'clock news, and I saw this on the news. I did not connect it with being anybody I knew. I just heard basically what you just heard Mark talk about, that it happened in Columbus. And I came, and I think Kathy was reading or something. I told her, I may have woken her up, but I told her that what I had just seen, I said, man, it is rough. I can't even get my breath to think some 14-year-old kid just experienced that. Not only that it happened, but that you watched it happen was traumatic for anybody to hear that news. And so I don't know if it was that night or the next morning I got the call that I was to go get them, and I realized the connection. So obviously all of Mark's family, the Mullins family, just salt of the earth people. So they were great people. They wouldn't have wished this on anybody either. And they were as devastated as everybody else. It was just an awful, awful time. I'll never forget it, Mark. I'll never forget. It was my responsibility to come to pick your parents up and bring them back to Reynolds. Let's talk a little bit about your other family that was in Germany, because I remember we had to wait several days before we had the funeral till they get back. So how did they find out about all this? How did they get the news? They were not happy. I remember that.
I believe Uda had to call my Uncle Peter, or, I'm not sure how they found out about it, or if Ronnie had to call them. They loved their sister. I had an Uncle York, Uncle Peter, and Uncle Wolfgang, but Peter and Wolfgang are the ones that come over. And I think we had to wait like a week, didn't we, Bruce?
Well, I actually looked that up. I thought that, but it actually, that this happened on a Saturday night, and we had the funeral on Thursday, so it was quicker than I thought. I looked it up.
And they knew that she was going through a divorce because she had called, Uncle Wolfgang and Uncle Peter and talked about possibly me and her going back to Germany. Wow. And I would go. They looked for information of. There was a Kennedy High School there in Berlin that that I could go to school to and all that. But then she didn't want to separate me and Ronnie, and things like that. So she made the decision, I guess, to stay.
Right. So how did they handle that? How did your uncles, when they came? I've got some memories. They're kind of vague, but I remember them being at the funeral.
I know that they were heartbroken and just very upset, and I don't know how they felt about her being buried here in Taylor County, but they do have a headstone over in Berlin in the cemetery with her name on it,
Yeah.
but she's not buried there. She's buried here in Taylor County. But my brother Ronnie, he was 5 years old and he was 18 at the time.
Right.
After all that happened, some of the stuff with the family coming and everything, it was kind of a blur for me, at times.
Were you born in Germany?
No, I was born in New Jersey.
Okay. I didn't know. You don't have a New Jersey accent.
No, I don't. Daddy was in the military, so I was born in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey.
Okay.
Patterson
Yeah.
Hospital.
Okay. How about Ronnie? Where was he born?
Ronnie was born right there in Reynolds.
Oh, was he? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
He was.
Okay. So I read, or I think I remember, hadn't your dad sent some letters to your mom, threatening to hurt himself or something? Hadn't that?
No, that's correct. Me and a friend were riding bicycles, and Daddy had done moved out, and he told me one time, he said, well, you need to come over there and see him. So we rode to his house. It was a trailer he was renting. But anyhow, we rode over there, and that was the first time I seen it. I was looking at it, and it was okay. trying to do what he wanted me to do.
Uh-huh.
And so we went over there, but then he gave me a envelope. He said, and he'd been drinking, and he gave me an envelope with a letter in it. He said, "Give this to your mama tomorrow." And he told me, he said, "But don't open it." And I said, "Okay." So anyway, me and that boy on the way home, of course, what's a 14-year-old gonna do?
Open it up and read it. Yeah.
Open it up and read it. And that's what I did. And I remember reading it. It was I'm sorry for what I've done, and I leave, take care of the boy. And it's a suicide letter.
Right. Right.
So what do I do?
How long was that before the incident? For all
that was probably maybe I'm not sure, Bruce. Maybe about 2 or 3 weeks, maybe.
Right.
But of course, I rushed home, and of course, I ain't gonna wait till the next day. I told her about it, and I give it to her. I guess she had made a phone call to him about it or something. Well, I think a couple days later, I was at home, and I don't know where Mama was. She might have been at Uda's or something, but I was at home, and he pulled up, and he come out there, and he blessed me out for giving, for telling her about the letter or whatever. I mean, he just basically cussed me for what I was,
Right.
And I looked at him and I said, "What did you want me to do?" He left, but I don't know. It was just, and I remember when we were going through the divorce, we had to go to the lawyer's office. I think it was his lawyer, Milton Hirsch was his name, I think, in Columbus. And I had to tell him who I wanted to live with.
So you're right in the middle of an awful, awful situation. That's rough on a kid, isn't it?
Yeah. And, and there was times Daddy would look at me and say, "Would you want to live with me?" And of course I was scared, and I'd say, "Well, yeah,
All right.
And, but then I remember when we went to the lawyer's office, I told the lawyer, I said, "Well, I want to stay with my mama." And I know that, I don't know, it's like, I've talked to Ronnie about things. Ronnie was with Daddy the night before he did all that. Daddy had stayed with my grandmother and Ronnie.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked Ronnie a lot of questions, wanted to know where a gun was at, a certain gun. Ronnie knows a lot of things,
Right.
about other stuff. But he was asking Ronnie where I had an Uncle Irving.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a gun, a 32, but he borrowed that from Uncle Irving or whatever. But he was asking Ronnie where a pistol was or something, Granddaddy Bob's pistol, and Ronnie said, "Well, what do you need it for?" He said, "Well, George has been threatening me." And that was his thing. But I'm going to get back to something here. I believe, Uda helped my mother, trying to help her out through this divorce.
Right.
As a friend. Had I went home that Saturday night, I believe Daddy was going to kill all of them.
Really?
That is my firm belief. Why would he want me to leave?
Right.
And he had it out. He didn't like Uda because Uda was helping her. I don't think he liked George because, George
didn't stop her from helping.
Yeah, and I believe had I went home, I believe he's going to kill them also.
Right.
I really do. That's just, I knew. And, the whole time I had a deep gut feeling Daddy was going to do something crazy,
How many people have you told this story to? I'm sure you told me in the text that you think about her just about every day of your life and think about that day. I
give my testimony at church, and I got into it a little bit, not as detailed as I am today,
Right.
And, but I've got two good friends, and that's Todd and Derek, and they know, other people know about it. And the older I get, I can talk about it,
But I'm sure for many years you couldn't even breathe thinking about it, right?
I couldn't, but like when I ended up getting old, about 18, I was able to. They give me the money that was in the bank from the insurance policy from my mama. which I don't think any 18-year-old should get that much money.
Right.
Now that I look back on, but then, I wasn't drinking real bad then, but I got into some drugs, and under the influence of drugs, I would talk about it to friends, and that made me talk about it, and but then the next day I wouldn't want to talk about it.
Right.
But
folks, we're going to get into this and the impact of this in his life as we go forward here. I'm talking to Mark Mullins, and he just introduced you to a little bit of what he has gone through in his life. So we'll be right back. So let's go from there, Mark. Talk about you started experimenting with drugs and stuff. You got some money, and then that took you down a different path, right? Just talk about that whole impact from the money, from the situation, or whatever. What happened to you?
Well, I was still living with my grandmother, and then when I turned 18, that's when I had access to the money, and I remember I don't know who it was. One of the family members said, "Well, you can move out." And so anyway, it was arranged where I bought a trailer, moved out on my own, and I ended up dropping out of school. I was in the 12th grade, and my grades, they said I could walk and with my cap and gown. I had already ordered them, but they said my grades, I'd have to go to summer school. And I said, no, I ain't doing all that, so, which my grades were bad because after all that happened, I couldn't concentrate in school.
I can imagine.
And it was just, I don't know. I couldn't do it. And, but anyway, so I moved out, and then somebody introduced me, to cocaine, and this was in the 80s, and I tried it, and it would make me talk about things and all that. And it was just, and then it just went from there. And that was about, I bought new cars. What word am I looking for? Just pacifying myself and making myself feel better with cars and drugs.
Whatever you could buy, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And didn't care how I was spending it. Didn't care, because I made a statement to somebody one time. I said, look how I got this money. I said, I don't care if I spend it all up.
Right.
And so, went through that, and then finally, the money run out, and I had to go to work, get a job. But it went going back, when I lived with my grandmother, when I moved in with her at 14, after all that happened, I think I lived there maybe a year, but I did not want to live there. All my friends were in Columbus. So Uda and George, I asked them, could I live with them? And they said, yeah. And I think, my grandmother, we was getting a VA check and Social Security. My daddy's Social Security, that's, you get that till you're 18. And so I think they made an arrangement where Uda and George was getting it to help, raise me and stuff. So I went back and lived there at the same house where everything happened. But I stayed busy all the time. I had a job at Piggly Wiggly, and went to school, and just all my friends were there. And I had, after all that happened, I remember I had some great times in the neighborhood, staying with my friends and stuff. This was before, I didn't do no drugs or drinking or nothing like that, just being a teenager.
Right.
And then later on, I noticed, George and Uda, they started having hard times, with their marriage, and they started going through a divorce. I think he moved out, and then he was basically like, I'm just gonna go through the same stuff. Yeah, I won't never forget, one day I was working at Piggly Wiggly, and I just sat there and thought, and I had a car then. It was a we bought it used. They got it for me. Made sure I got a ride, and
right.
So I could get back and forth to work. But I just up and went back to Uda and George's. They went home, and I got what clothes, I could. And I just left
Hmm.
and went back to my grandmother's. And then I ended up living with her, until I moved out and got that trailer.
So I want to talk about the emotions. What I remember in Mark is one thing that sticks out at me. And, I've had a lot of funerals in my life, so all of them don't stick out, but this one does. I remember that there were two caskets. I'm almost certain that they were what we call Neapolitan blue, which was a dark blue. They were round shaped. They were both in the chapel. So we had a double funeral, which, I know there had to be conflict, especially when the people from Germany, the family from Germany got there. But I remember you specifically, and it was heartbreaking because you were going through all the emotions. You would walk to look at your dad, then you walk over and look at your mom. Both caskets were open. You would scream at your dad. You would say, "Why would you do this?" And then it's a minute you'd say, "I love you," and so you were just torn between any emotions you would have with your daddy and mama both being, you're 14 years old, both deceased, laying in the casket side by side of what happened. And I'm sure that went on the rest of your life. As you got older, you had to be torn with emotions as you thought about what happened. You go from the love you have for your parents to you're angry about what happened and blaming him or blame whatever. I'm sure the other family blamed her. I mean, whatever happens, that just happens. They've got conflict. But what you were going through had to be tearing your heart out, going through all the emotions you went through for many years, right?
Yeah, it did. And that the older I got, and I'm not going to lie, the older I got, the more I hated him.
Right.
I was angry at God. I just couldn't understand why God would let something like that happen. And I couldn't stand the fact that she's laying next to the person that murdered her at the cemetery.
Yeah, I get it.
And to this day, sometimes I still get mad about it. But, I couldn't make that choice at 14. Ronnie, bless his heart, he didn't know what to do. That's his parents. He wanted them put there,
Sure.
But Ronnie had a little bit of a relationship with Daddy, because he was older.
Right.
I had a relationship with him, but he was just Daddy. But you know what I mean? I didn't hang out with him much. I think Ronnie went fishing with him quite a bit sometimes, but I never did, really. I was, I guess, what you call a mama's boy. But
were you able to come to some measure of forgiveness for your dad as you got older? As you said, you became a Christian. How did you handle that, or how do you handle it? I mean, you're a human being. You have to deal with stuff. It's not easy. So how do you handle that? How do you reconcile that?
Bruce, I'm not gonna lie, I still struggle with that. I know everybody says, God forgives you. You need to forgive your daddy, and I try to forgive him. Some days I feel like, hey, I have forgiven you. But then the next day I get to thinking and I get mad again. I struggle with it, and I know I should forgive him because alcohol is what killed everything.
Yeah, well, alcohol can make people do things that they wouldn't normally do. That is for sure, right?
Yeah. And, but I still struggle with the forgiveness, and I know I'll pull up an excuse and say, well, how can you forgive somebody if they don't ask for forgiveness?
Right.
And he can't ask me for forgiveness, and I know that's selfish on my part, but that's just something I deal with it, and I don't know, God knows what's in my heart. And I think he understands if I have days where I just don't forgive Daddy. But then there's, and I know I need to, but I just don't have that reassurance that I have.
Yeah, you've been what you go through in both extremes of that. That is your daddy. I know you loved your daddy. You loved your mama, but for what happened, it makes it very difficult to reconcile. I can't imagine how you've been pulled emotionally and spiritually and every other way over the years. And I saw it happening when you were 14, standing watching you, and just, wow, how will he ever get over this? How will he ever get over this mountain? What will happen to this young man? I remember thinking that, and here we are. You turned out pretty doggone good. We're supposed to come back and talk about it. I can tell you, it's a great story, folks. I'm talking to Mark Mullins, and you're going to be amazed at what you're about to hear. So now how old are you? 56, 57? What are you?
I'm 57. I'll be 58 in August.
Okay. And so today you are married.
I'm married.
Beautiful wife. You got 2 gorgeous daughters. You got how many grandchildren? 1?
I got 1 grandson. He's 9.
Yeah. And so we also know that, and I see this posted on Facebook, you've been sober for 12 years.
Yes, sir.
You've living a wonderful life. And let's just talk about that. Talk about how you met Wendy. And I know it hadn't always been easy with Wendy, because you've been married to Wendy for 35 years or something. So that hadn't been easy either. But just talk about how you got to where you are today.
Me and Wendy met when I come back to Reynolds. I worked at the IGA there in Reynolds. We met at the IGA, I guess, her and Angie. I got off work. It was funny. I'd always run into them, and they'd be in Wendy's car.
Right.
And anyway, we met one night in Butler. Everybody would go hang out, and do things. And we met there, and, we dated for 5 years before we got married. And we got married in 1989. And, I wasn't drinking bad then. When I run out of the money, and when me and Derek was living together, and then I went and I moved in with Milton Bone and Gail Bone. Derek asked me could I live there. But me and Wendy dated, and in them times we dated, I still, at the beginning, I had some money left, and we was dating, but then I would call myself dating her, but then I wouldn't hardly pay any attention to her,
Wow.
And, I'd run in the streets and stuff. But anyway, later on, we really got, serious and everything. And then we got married, and we had Shelby in 1994. She's one of them flood babies, the flood of 94. I'll never forget that. But, and then we had Chelsea in 1999. We bought our first house probably in around 95, I think. And we lived there, and then we sold it and made some money off of, selling it. And then we bought where we're at now. And probably in my about 42 or 43 is when I started really abusing alcohol. It just, things built up, and I don't know. I hated myself at the time. I went through a dark place, and I've always drank, but I started drinking the liquor, and I'm like, I always say this, I don't deserve Wendy, because Wendy put up with a lot, me being so depressed and down, and Chelsea and Shelby, they can remember when I, was drinking, and I don't know, I couldn't get along with anybody no more.
Right.
Toward the end. And finally, after trying rehab a few times, trying to quit, and it didn't work. And one time I did quit for about maybe 3 or 4 years, and that was beer, but when I started drinking that liquor, and I just went into a dark place, and I don't know, things was just building up in me, and kept things. I didn't talk about things. I tried to talk about it with Wendy, but I talk about it to her now more than ever since I'm sober.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, when you were going through all that with the alcohol, did you have flashes back that I'm doing the same thing Daddy was doing? Is that part of what brought you to that darkness?
Exactly. I thought about that. I'd sit there and think, I always said I wasn't going to be like him, but look at me.
Right.
I'm ending up, I'm acting like he did,
Right.
if not worse,
Yeah. And that had to be a fear. I mean, it had to be something that you saw as a kid, how it impacted, and you realizing I'm going down the same path.
Yeah.
I can only imagine. Yeah.
In 2012 is when I hit that rock bottom, Bruce. I don't know. I was suicidal. I didn't want to live anymore. I remember it was raining, and me and Wendy, I was just cussing Wendy and just raising Cain and tearing the house up. And she had to leave.
Right.
She was scared, and when she left, I won't never forget it. I was thinking, well, I need to end it. I need to end my life. I need to do it. I went out in the yard. I didn't own a gun then, and glad I didn't. But I went out in the yard and I just contemplating on hanging myself from a tree. And I remember I even put the belt around my neck and I climbed in that tree. And I had my little, I think I might have had a flip. No, I had a cell phone in my pocket, and I just, something hit me. And I said, I need help, and I called the police myself. I told them, I said, I need help. I said, I'm thinking about killing myself here. And they blue lights, they carried me to Macon that night to the Coliseum and to detox and everything. And I won't never forget, one of the nurses, well, she was the head nurse, whatever. She looked on the insurance, and after I'd been there, 3 or 4 days, and I was determined I was gonna beat this thing. I was gonna quit drinking. I was gonna do it. When I got out of there, I come home for a few days, but she had arranged things for me to go to Florida for long term. So I went down there, and I stayed for 21 days, which wasn't long enough. I wasn't ready to come home, but the insurance, they wouldn't pay anymore. But they had it was in Navarre. It was called 12 Oaks Recovery, and they had a PTSD thing. And, and I always thought PTSD is military. You know what I mean? Things like that. But, so anyway, I went down there and hadn't drank since I come home from there.
And that's been 12 years.
12 years. 12 years and some days.
And how do you feel today?
Feel great. You just don't know.
So, what's crazy, Mark, is I'm sitting here listening. There'll be a lot of people listening to this. There'll a lot of people that are at the end of their rock bottom that will be listening to this. And listening to you may just be just like the call you made to the police that day. They made, wait, there is hope. I don't have to give up. And that's the whole story here is it doesn't matter what somebody goes through. You're living proof. If you can live through what you lived through and now have these 2 gorgeous daughters that are producing kids, and there are going to be more kids to come, and a beautiful wife, and Opal, the mother-in-law, it don't come any better. I mean, I've known her all my life. To be able to be where you are from where you were, that is absolutely incredible, isn't it? I mean, it's absolutely incredible story for somebody to hear, and I think it gives people hope. So how did you, part of all this was your conversion and your giving your heart to God, and through all this, talk a little bit about how that influenced you.
I don't read the big book, my big book, the Bible, but the big book, I'm talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. I started out reading it, but my number one thing is God. God has helped me through this, and I know that I have, back in the day, I cussed him for what he was worth. I mean, if I said that, I don't mean it like that. You know what I mean?
Right, I get it.
I was angry with him, but since I've gotten God in my life, things, I still struggle.
Sure.
I'll never get over what happened, but I learned to live with it.
Right.
You have to, and if anybody ever gets to the rock bottom place and they think they can't go on, well, when you hit rock bottom, there ain't but one way to go, and that's back up.
Right. That's true. And you get to the point where you desperately needed him. You were desperate for him. And I think probably till a person gets desperate for God, he'll probably never know him, you know?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you don't
You know,
have to
there
go
might,
through what you went through to be desperate, but there is something about being desperate for wanting God as much as you want your next breath, and I think that's where you were, right?
yeah, exactly. And Opal, that's the rock of the family. You know, she is a Christian. She's an influence on people. She's been through a lot. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh, yeah.
and I see how things, you got to do it. You got to trust in God and get him in your life. And, and then, I mean, she's was my inspiration, and Wendy was too, to get saved. I didn't get saved till I was like, I might have been 19,
Right.
but I was going to church with Wendy and
Right.
Oprah. And,
Well, yeah, she's solid as a rock. I mean, Oprah, not only that, was very successful. What she in her career, she was, I think, valedictorian of a high school. She's smart. Like I said, I've known her forever. It's not any. You couldn't have hooked up with a better family than you.
oh, I know.
I mean, really, that's another God thing.
That's another blessing from God.
Oh, can you imagine? I mean, so when you look back at it, Mark, when you were sitting there watching all that happen when you were a kid, you were surprised, you were shook up. God was not surprised. I mean, he can't be surprised if he is all knowing. And he knew that in 2024, you would be where you are today, in a position to tell your story, to help other people that desperately need him. That's not, he's in. And when you look at life in that perspective, it changes everything. It changes everything. If you look at it from your perspective, it's a mess. If you look at it from his perspective, it's a pretty beautiful story. That's what it is. Yeah.
And he knew the whole story the whole time.
Yeah, he had to.
He knew what was going to happen. He knew how everything was going to, the outcome of everything.
And that knowledge gives hope to other people who are in a bad place, that you feel that, but God is waiting, and he's in control, and he can change everything, right?
Exactly. And it's just, everything's for a reason.
Yeah.
But I know that there's people out there that have seen worse and have been through worse. And so, I look at it like that. I said, it's not just me.
Oh, sure.
There's so many people out there that's got way bigger problems than I had,
right.
And that's a good way to look at it. And then one of my big things that I love is the book of Job. Look what he went through.
Yeah.
So that's an inspiration, right there, the story of that.
Well, you went through it, but you're now 57, and you're now looking back, and you've got a beautiful life. You got a beautiful family. I mean, listen, folks, he's got a gorgeous wife. He's got two of the best looking daughters you ever met in your life. Married to good folks. They got a beautiful thing going on, and it's fun to watch. It's a blessing to watch. And I remember watching when you were 14 in that room that day when you were seeing your parents for the first time at the funeral home. And now I'm watching from a different perspective. And it is a blessing, man. It is a blessing. You are a miracle. And I think your brother Ronnie is another miracle, right? Didn't I see that?
He is. When I quit drinking, and I quit for myself, not for anybody else, but I influenced him. He was still drinking, and he's been sober 2 years now.
How about that?
And he told me, he said, you inspired me, Mark.
Well, you guys are something else, and I'm proud of you. And to be able to see it from then, at that, I had a front row seat to where you are now. It's really, really inspiring. And I am very, very proud of you. I'm proud for you. I'm proud for Wendy. I'm proud for your girls. I can see the pride in even their Facebook post that they have in their daddy. And, when you overcome something, you become a lot of people's heroes. And I think you have become a hero. What is your message to people? And you've probably already said this, but we'll give you another shot at it, that are listening to this, that are facing an impossible situation. They're in some kind of situation like you were in, like my world just ended. I'm in a mess. I don't even know what way to go. What is your message to them?
Trust in the Lord. Pray about it. And there might be some people out there that don't believe in the Lord. Just don't give up. It's a storm. but the storm will pass. It always does. And, it's up to you whether you're going to just sit there and move with the storm and never get out of it, or you're going to start walking and get through the storm.
Right.
Come out the other side. And, and it's just, I don't know. I wanted to give up. I realized you can't give up.
Right.
And, just trust in the Lord, pray to him. And even if you think it's not going to get better, it's going to get better.
Yeah.
It's going to.
It is. I mean, you see it every day. The sun comes up, it goes down.
Yep.
It rains, and sun shines. It's the cycle of life, and nothing is permanent. Everything's temporary. You deal with the ramifications of what happened, but it all changes. It's all temporary, so nothing is permanent. So you don't make what's the quote? You don't make permanent decisions based on a temporary situation, and a lot of people have done that for sure. So let me ask you this: what do you want your girls to remember about you? If you had to give them one message, what do you want them to know about you?
Well, first and foremost, just how much I love them, and never give up. If you have problems, trust in the Lord, and they both do. Just how I overcome things. I mean, there's people that overcome worse, but I did it, and I'm doing it day by day. If you ever get down and out, and this isn't for my girls here, but this is just for other people, it's like with the permanent and temporary. If you're ever so down that you think you don't want to live no more, that's a permanent solution for a temporary problem.
Right.
But I want my girls and my grandchildren just remember me of just how much I love them, and bad things, you can overcome it.
Isn't that true? It doesn't matter what you're going through. There's hope. This is a very hopeful discussion for people, and it's inspiring for people that are not in the middle of a storm too. Because I've learned, Mark, you're either in a storm or you're about to go in one. There are different kind of storms, but it's gonna happen. It's always something.
Yeah.
It's no smooth sailing for anybody.
Yeah, when your life's going good, you still gonna have storms,
aren't you? Aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can be sober as anything. Doesn't mean stuff is not gonna happen. I can tell you
that's
that.
right.
Yeah,
you're exactly right.
Mark, you're a blessing, my friend. I'm just blown away by your story. I'm blown away by how this came about. It's so neat for me to be there standing. I remember standing at the back of that chapel watching this 14-year-old kid and thinking, I mean, I was 27 or whatever I was. I'm standing there watching you, and I remember thinking, will this guy have a chance? I mean, what in the world will become of him? So here we are 43 years later, and God created a miracle, and that's the story. Mark, thank you so much for telling this. Man, this has been a blessing.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and I love you, my brother.
I love you too, man. And I love Wendy. I love your family. This is good stuff. So thank you, my friend.
Hey, thank you very much,
All right, brother.
Bruce.
life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.